What's up guys, it's Cal, and in this video we'll be taking a look at Retribution Paladins on the Battle for Azeroth beta. We'll be looking at their baseline abilities as well as their passives, and then we'll check out their talents and PvP talents. Now for baseline abilities, not so many changes, but for talents, there's a lot of changes. Now just like my other overview videos, this isn't meant to tell you which talents to pick for the best DPS, or if Ret is one of the best specs for DPS. This is merely to show you what's to come. So, let's get started. So here are all of the baseline abilities for the Retribution Paladin. As far as baseline abilities go, there's only, I think, like 2 changes, so there's not a lot. Lay on Hands is the same, 10-minute cooldown. You can heal yourself or a friendly target for an amount equal to your maximum health, and of course it causes forbearance for 30 seconds. I believe your artifact weapon makes forbearance like 20 seconds or something, but we won't have artifact weapons anymore, so keep that in mind. Flash of Light does not change. You know, you spend a high amount of mana, you heal someone for a high amount, and it has like a 1-ish to 2-second cast time. Divine Shield does not change, 5-minute cooldown. It's one of your bubbles. It grants immunities to all damage and harmful effects for 8 seconds. And then of course causes forbearance. Blessing of Protection is also unchanged, 5-minute cooldown, blesses a party or raid member, granting immunities to physical damage and harmful effects for 10 seconds. And then of course also causes forbearance. Blessing of Freedom, 25-second cooldown. This is also not changed. You could put it on a party or raid member or yourself, and it grants immunities to movement impairing effects for 8 seconds. Cleanse Toxins is also not changed, 8-second cooldown, removes all poison effects and diseases from a friendly target. And then Shield of Vengeance is also not changed, 2-minute cooldown. You know, it's a defensive cooldown. You put a barrier around yourself that absorbs damage, and then after 15 seconds, all that damage is expelled and split amongst everything around you. Avenging Wrath. First thing to have some change to it. So it's still a 2-minute cooldown. It calls upon the lights to become an avatar of Retribution, increasing your damage, healing, and critical strike chance by 20% for 20 seconds. So on live, what it does is it increases your damage by 35% and your healing by 35%. And it doesn't increase your crit. So they've brought those percentages for damage and healing down to 20%, and now it does increase your crit. So there's that. And then Divine Seed does not change, 45-second cooldown. It's a, speed increase cooldown. Hop onto a charger, increases your movement speed by 100% for 3 seconds, and you can use it while indoors or in combat. And then Hand of Hindrance does not change, 30-second cooldown. It's a slow effect, reduces the target's movement speed by 70% for 10 seconds. Crusader Strike is not changed. Still has a cooldown based off of your haste. It's, your basic ability, does physical damage to the target, it generates 1 holy power, and it's 2 charges to it. Judgment is the other thing that is changed. So it still has a cooldown based off of your haste, judges the target, dealing some holy damage and causing them to take 25% increased damage from your next ability that costs holy power. So what this does on live is it increases your damage by some percentage from holy power spenders because of your mastery. Your mastery buffed judgment, while in BFA your mastery no longer directly affects judgment. I will of course talk about mastery when I get there, but now it just strictly increases the damage of your next ability that costs holy power by 25%. So that 25% is not based off your mastery. Oh, and then on top of that, Judgment also generates 1 holy power, whereas on live it generates, well, no holy power. And then there's Blade of Justice, which is not changed. It has a cooldown based off your haste, pierces an enemy with a blade, dealing some physical damage, and generates 2 holy power. Templar's Verdict does not change. It is your, kind of holy power dump. Still costs 3 holy power, and it unleashes a powerful weapon strike that deals holy damage to an enemy target. Divine Storm, this is your holy power dump for AoE, costs 3 holy power, and then damages all nearby enemies for some holy damage. Hammer of Justice, your stun, 1-minute cooldown, stuns the target for 6 seconds, so that's not changed. Rebuke is your interrupt, also not changed, 15-second cooldown, does all that. Greater Blessing of Kings is not changed. I believe it had some rewording to it, but in retrospect, it's not changed. You can see my buff up there. The buff still reads the exact same. So it still places a powerful blessing on a single ally for 1 hour, granting shield that absorbs up to some damage every 6 seconds. So that absorption damage does replenish every 6 seconds. And then Greater Blessing of Wisdom is also not changed. Places a powerful blessing on a single ally for 1 hour, restoring 1% of their maximum health and mana every 10 seconds. My bad. And then Hand of Reckoning, that is your taunt. 8-second cooldown. It is not changed. And then Redemption is your res. So this is also not changed. You can bring a dead ally back to life for 35% health. Now let's take a look at the passive abilities. So for passive abilities, Art of War is new. So this actually used to be a talent called Blade of Wrath. Blade of Wrath is still actually a talent, but it does something completely different. So they just baked that into Ret Pally's passives. Art of War. So your auto attacks have a chance to reset the cooldown of Blade of Justice. And then Heart of Crusader is not changed. Your movement speed is increased by 20% while mounted, and it doesn't stack with other effects. So this is your mastery. It will now increase your holy damage by just some amount. It no longer does some direct buff to Judgment. I mean, it still increases the damage of Judgment because Judgment causes holy damage, but yeah, it doesn't, exactly do the same thing as Mastery does on live. And then there is Retribution, which is not changed. When any party member within 40 yards dies, you gain 20% increased damage done and 30% reduced damage taken for 10 seconds. So now let's take a look at the talents, and I'll also talk about PvP talents in case you care about those. Now, in complete contrast with the talents and baseline abilities, pretty much all of the talents have been changed. A majority of them, at least. So there's Zeal. So Zeal was moved up a tier, and it's pretty much changed. So first off, as you can tell, it's now a passive. Judgment empowers you with Holy Zeal, causing your next 3 auto attacks to occur 30% faster and deal an additional 100 and something holy damage. And then there's Righteous Verdict. So this is actually new. There used to actually be an artifact ability called Righteous Verdict, but this one's completely different. So it's a passive. Templar's Verdict increases the damage of your next Templar's Verdict by 15% for 6 seconds. And then there's Execution Sentence. So first off, the cooldown is now 30 seconds. It used to be a cooldown based off your haste, which was most likely less than 30 seconds, but now it's a strict 30-second cooldown. Still costs 3 holy power, calls down the Light's punishment upon an enemy target, dealing some holy damage and increasing the target's holy damage taken from your attacks by 20% for 6 seconds. So that second effect, where it increases holy damage taken, all that part is new. Now for the level 30 tier. So first off, Fires of Justice used to be called the Fires of Justice, but not only that, it also has another change to it. So it reduces the cooldown of Crusader's Strike by 15%. On live, that's 1 second, and it grants it a 15% chance to make your next ability consume 1 less holy power. So for me, I mean, this tune isn't geared at all, but my Crusader Strike has a 5.2 second cooldown recharge, so 15% of that is 0.78 seconds. So there's definitely a chance that you could have more than a 1 second increase, but then also definitely a chance that you can have less than a 1 second increase. And then Blade of Wrath. So as I talked about earlier, Blade of Wrath is still a talent, but it was also completely reworked. And it was reworked to buff Art of War. So first off, it was actually moved up a couple tiers, but it's a passive. Art of War resets the cooldown of Blade of Justice 100% more often and increases its damage by 25%. And then we have Hammer of Wrath. So Hammer of Wrath is returning. So this was actually removed in Legion. And I believe as far as the effect goes, it pretty much does the same thing from before it was removed. It has a cooldown based off of your haste, hurls a divine hammer that strikes an enemy for some holy damage, only usable in enemies that have less than 20% health, so it's an execute ability, or while you're empowered by Avenging Wrath, so also not just an execute ability, and it also generates 1 holy power. So before it was removed, I don't believe it generated holy power, but now it does. And then we have the level 45 tier. So the only change to it is actually Fist of Justice, which is a passive. Each holy power spent reduces the remaining cooldown on Hammer of Justice by 2 seconds. On live, it's 2.5 seconds. So it is getting slightly nerfed. Repentance, we know what Repentance does. It's not changed. It's a 15-second cooldown. It's a CC. You can only use it on humanoids, demons, undead, dragonkin, and giants. And then Blinding Light is also not changed, 1.5 minute cooldown. You can emit a blinding light within 10 yards around you, and it makes all enemies within 10 yards be disoriented for 6 seconds. And then we have the level 60 tier. So Divine Judgment is new. It's a passive. Each enemy hit by an ability that consumes holy power increases the damage of your next judgment by 20%, stacking up to 15 times. And then there's Consecration. So Consecration was first off moved down a few tiers. It has a strict cooldown of 20 seconds, so it's not based off of your haste anymore, and it will now generate 1 holy power. So on live, it doesn't generate any holy power, now generates 1, and its effect is actually still the same. So it consecrates the land beneath you, causing holy damage over 6 seconds to enemies who enter the area. And then Wake of Ashes. So this should look familiar to all you rep pallies because this was the main artifact ability that your artifact weapon granted you. And the only change to it actually, well, it actually has 2 changes. So its cooldown is going up from 30 seconds to 45 seconds. It will still lash out at your enemies, dealing some radiant damage to all enemies within 12 yards in front of you and reducing their movement speed by 50% for 5 seconds. That's still the same on live. And then demons and undead enemies are also stunned for 5 seconds. So on live, they're stunned for 6 seconds, So that is just going down to 5 seconds. Oh, and it also generates 5 holy power. I actually just now noticed that. But yeah, so it generates 5 holy powers on live. It does not. And then the level 75 tier. So Retribution is now getting Unbreakable Spirit. This used to just be a holy talent, and it reduces the cooldown of your Divine Shield, Divine Vengeance, and Lay on Hands by 30%. And then Cavalier is not changed. Divine Steed now has 2 charges. And then Eye for an Eye. Its picture was changed. I don't believe its effect was actually changed at all. It was just reworded. So it's still a 1 minute cooldown. Surrounds yourself with a bladed bulwark, reducing physical damage taken by 35% and dealing physical damage to any melee attacker for 6 seconds. Then the level 90 tier has Selfless Healer. So this is returning just to Ret. It was removed in Legion. So what it does is your holy power spending abilities reduce the cast time of your next flash of lights by 25% and increases its healing done by 10%, which stacks up to 4 times. Justicar's Vengeance was moved down a tier, and it still costs 5 holy power, focuses holy energy to deliver a powerful weapon strike that deals holy damage and restores health equal to the damage done, but the damage is increased by 50% when used against stun targets, whereas on live, it's increased by 100%. So that part is getting nerfed. And then Word of Glory. It was moved down a tier. It still costs 3 holy power, 2 charges, 1 minute recharge, and it will now heal a friendly target and the 2 most injured targets within 30 yards for some amount. So as on live, this would heal yourself and like 5 targets within 15 yards, but it doesn't do that anymore. Level 100 tier. Divine Purpose. Your abilities that consume holy power have a 15% chance, on live it's 20% chance, to make your next ability that consumes holy power free and deal 30% increased damage and healing. So that 30% part is new. Crusade. 2 minute cooldown still replaces Avenging Wrath. Call upon the light and begin a crusade, increasing your damage done and haste by 3% for 25 seconds. So that is going up from the 20 seconds on live, and then each holy power spent during Crusader increases damage done and haste by an additional 3%, and this stacks up to 10 times, whereas on live it would stack up to 15 times. So it lasts longer, but it stacks up to less. And then Inquisition is returning. So this is actually removed in Warlords of Draenor. Now it's coming back. You can spend anywhere from 1 to 3 holy power on it, consumed up to 3 holy power to increase your damage done and haste by 7%, and it lasts 15 seconds per holy power consumed. So there you have it. Those are all the talents. Now let's take a look at PvP talents. If you're unaware of how PvP talents will work in Legion, this is how it goes. You have these 4 bubbles here. This first bubble is the same for all specs and all classes in the game. It has Gladiator's Medallion, Adaptation, and Relentless. They are not changed at all from their live iteration, and you get to pick between one of these 3. So they're on the first tier on live, you still get to pick between one of them. And then these next 3 bubbles are a giant pool of your already existing PvP talents. So it's no longer on a tier system. So 3 that you might really like on live that are on the same tier, well, you can pick them in BFA as long as they didn't get rid of them, because they only just pruned a few of them off. As far as changes go to these, there have only been like 2 small changes to them, but for the most part, the PvP talents are not changed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mouse over them. If you want to know what it does, you can look at your rep pally, or you can pause the video, but I'm just going to be reading the names off, and for the 2 that have changes to them, I'll of course talk about what those changes are. So there's Luminescence, Unbound Freedom, Holy Ritual, Vengeance Aura, Blessing of Sanctuary, Seraphim's Blessing. Now, small change to Seraphim's Blessing. When you or nearby allies within 40 yards drop below 40% health, your next flash of light cast within 5 seconds is instant with 50% increased healing. So that part is new. It now increases the healing by 50%, and this effect cannot occur more than once every 15 seconds. So there's that, and then Lawbringer, Divine Punisher, Hammer of Reckoning. Now this, I think is a change. Not 100% sure on it, but the cooldown is now based off your haste. I think on live it has a strict cooldown of 1 minute, but it still does the same thing. So when you or allies with greater blessings take damage, you gain Reckoning, consume 50 stacks of Reckoning to hurl a magical hammer that strikes an enemy for some holy damage, and you gain Avenging Wrath for 6 seconds. And then there's Jurisdiction, Law and Order, and then Cleansing Light. And those are all the PvP talents, as well as all of the normal talents. And there you have it, all the changes to Retribution Pallies coming in the Battle for Azeroth pre-patch, which is coming July 17th. If you guys like these changes, then you can leave in the comments below, or if you hate these changes. But if you guys enjoyed this video, then you can leave a like on it, you can sub to the channel for more videos like this, and I'll see you guys in the next video.